Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Web Development Masterclass organized by Dark Tech Solutions. Um, More or less, Dark Tech Solutions is a growing startup that's into all things IT, looking for ways whereby we can breach world challenges or challenges within our locality and also our outside society by means of the growing field of information technology, either through trainings, developing websites, and all general things IT. Um, my name is Oladile Omaruke. I am the training and development lead of Dark Tech Solutions Nigeria, and I'll be the one taking us through this wonderful ride into the world of web development, showing us what it's all about, all what it entails, and giving us a brief introduction to steer our interest in it. So, the outline for this masterclass is to introduce us to web development, answering or demystifying what it is about. We are also going to, and I'm also going to try my best to answer why you would like to learn web development in this time and in this season, and also in this society that we are in. I would like to also introduce us to the best languages for web development, or the best languages that you can seek to learn when you want to take a career in web development. I would also want to show us useful links and resources whereby we can access all things related to these languages and learn further. And that will be very rather useful after we've done a basic project which introduces us into using a code editor to code, and also how these languages that we want to use for web development works. And also at the end of it all, I would introduce us to next steps after learning the basics. So without further ado, let me begin. So the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is web development? I would say web development is more or less the work involved or the work entailed in developing a website for the internet. It could be the website we could be talking about could just be a simple static page, just having plain text, no functionality on anything. Or it could even advance to using complex internet applications which could be used for a variety of purposes. For example, websites like WhatsApp, a variety of websites could actually be used to carry out to solve internet problems which could be designed using web development. Also, electronic businesses, for example, the likes of Paystack, the likes of PayPal, have web developed sites which are being built by web development practices, and also social networking services, for example, the likes of WhatsApp, Facebook, and the likes. So we need to also have a means to differentiate or break down what web development is all about. It's basically the act of building web apps, and when I mean web apps, these are applications that run on a web server, which are rather different from the apps that run on our OS. For example, Microsoft Word is an OS application which you can easily access on your system, and you can actually use from start to finish without actually even making use of any internet connection. But that is totally different from the likes of using the likes of WhatsApp, the likes of Facebook, in which you need to use a very good internet browser, for example like Google Chrome or Firefox, with a stable internet connection to be able to access it and to make maximum use of the functionalities that it provides. So web applications are different as well from mobile applications, because mobile applications also need a good internet connection, but it's not compulsory that you have to access them through a browser. They are downloadable and they can be used as long as there's an internet connection. But a web application requires the use of a browser to be able to access it with good internet connection. Also, I would also like to mention that web applications and websites generally entail using the client-server infrastructure, or the client-server architecture, in the sense that the client is you yourself who accesses the system or accesses a laptop and types in like, for example, a very classic example is if you want to check for the number of people in Lagos State, or the number of people in Nigeria, we all go to use Google the Google site to search for this, and we are the clients. We go and we search through the Google search bar. Once we go, we are saying that as a client we are making a request to try and get some data from a server or a remote server somewhere, and this server that sends us back this information is more or less the server part of the architecture. I'll break it down and make it simplify it in form of a simple everyday interaction that we have. Let's say as a person, we go into a restaurant and we say we want to buy jollof rice, for example, or normal rice, for example. The fact that we are normally given like a menu or a piece of paper or something that describes what is being sold or is being provided by a restaurant, and the restaurant is in this case the internet, the World Wide Web. But we have a piece of paper or a menu whereby it shows everything that it stands to provide, and that is we now in this case are more or less like the client. So when we say that we want to actually get jollof rice, or we make our demand for jollof rice, we give that to a waiter. The waiter is more or less this server, and this server gets back our information back to us in form of a response, and it's either it will tell us that the rice that we're looking for is more or less available or is not available. So we are the clients, we are the users that make this request, and the server reads our request and provides us a response as long as that information is readily available. And that is how most of the modern applications these days are done, using a client-side language for the front-facing part, which we interact with, and a back-end server language which gives us the information we need. So before I break down most of all of these things I've said, we need to understand why we need to learn web development as a discipline. It's a booming industry with an offering of diverse opportunities. A booming industry in the sense that, unlike previous times past, most of the top jobs in the world would entail jobs work in blue chip companies, in earning millions of naira or dollars, as the case may be, and doing white collar jobs, trying to work in maybe places like the petroleum industry as engineers, as doctors, and the likes. But as time has changed now, it's looking, or it's trending towards that the future, that as we see it, is trending towards IT, and more or less IT is going to serve as the new oil. And beautiful part of everything is that there are so many opportunities within the IT sector in which web development is one, and within web development there are many options in which you can take a career in. For example, you could take up a career in web development as maybe a front-end engineer, a back-end engineer, a full-stack developer or software engineer. You can work in DevOps, you can work in quality assessment and testing and the likes, and you would see that it's an industry that is only going to grow as the demands for solving solutions with technology is going to rise over a long period of time. There will be more need for more automation and more usage for technology, and it only serves as a good sign that this industry is only going to boom in time to come. Also, we also have that gratification of solving life's problems or being a change agent through technology. Using an example of Paystack or Stripe, years ago it was almost difficult that if you want to buy stuff on the long run, for example, you want to buy tickets, or you want to buy airtime, or you want to pay a utility bill, you have to write a teller down, write the amount you need to pay, go to a bank and pay it. But via technology, people in Paystack thought of it like they wanted a situation whereby payments could be electronically based, that you could just access a site using your browser, type in a particular set of digits, the price or what you want to buy, you insert some additional information, and then you send, and you get value for your money. This was born from a need to solve a life problem whereby payments of for goods and services are more or less automated and more or less easy to render. And here we are now. It's Paystack has been acquired by Stripe and has made a lot of money, and at the same time they've helped solve a lifelong problem, and have only made opportunities to solve more problems via that more or less able. And how can that be done? That's through web development or information technology, as the case may be. Also, there's also the ability to express your inner creativity. The thing about web development as a discipline is that there are no limits to it, and it only opens up more possibilities according to your creativity. In what I'm saying in essence is, the more creative you are, the higher your chances of being able to express that inner creativity through web development. The beautiful sites and the beautiful designs that we are seeing is a result of people saying that they want to express their inner creativity and use that creativity to solve lifelong problems. Yes, then of course the pay. In terms of indices and in terms of statistical checks, it's been seen that web development as a discipline has risen up to become one of the highest paying jobs, or one of the highest paying industries in the world, in the sense that the salaries are mind-blowing, and especially if you are working remotely in your home country, whereby for example in Nigeria that we are in terms of conversions of salaries. For example, as a junior developer in let's say working remotely for a company in Britain, the minimum salary you can actually earn hypothetically is running between £25,000 and it goes to a ceiling of almost £50,000 or £80,000, as the case may be. Considering that as it may be, and working here in Nigeria, working remotely with almost apart from taxes and or little or nothing else to pay for, that is a very huge payoff as compared to working in many blue chip companies or working in the top notch white collar jobs in Nigeria over here, because not many companies are able to pay that if converted to naira. So the pay is very, very wide, and it only gets higher as long as you as much as your development, or will I say your experience level, varies. Like it's the amount a senior engineer earns is even up to 4 times what a junior engineer earns, and the more you prove your competency, the higher your pay, and the higher your pay, the higher it is. Really, there's really not much of a ceiling working as a web developer or a software engineer in terms of looking at the web side of things. You can also use knowledge to build useful applications as a software as a service. That's an SaaS principle. And for example, Paystack is a software as a service, and you can sell off that, because most recently Paystack was bought over by Stripe, and it was via their need to build up that software as a service, and we realized it was the right time to sell off, and the pay was very massive, and it was more or less a win-win for them, and they could only achieve that via the skills that they learned to build that website and all. All right. Also, one of the quirks or the perks of working as a web developer is in the sense that you can work in a variety of scenarios, either working from the comfort of your home remotely, either for a company within your locality, or a company abroad, and you earn from the comfort of your bed. You could just say you rise up from your bed, take a seat, click on your system, write some code, deploy the code within a few periods. Like for example, if you have a working internet connection and you are good enough to code and other things, you could just even do work that could normally take the normal 9 to 5. You can actually do it in less time according to your skill or competency in carrying out those particular tasks that you are given. and your job for the day is done, as compared to working for a 9 to 5, whereas even if you have nothing to do, you still have to make yourself available. And even if you want to work for a 9 to 5, it's still very good to be a computer engineer, because even the 9 to 5 might not be as strenuous, or could be as strenuous as the case may be, but it's really not as strenuous as many other jobs, trust me. You could also decide that you don't want to either work remotely or work for under anybody, and you could just decide to just work freelance or set up your own company. The thing is, as long as you have that a system and you have the competency, there is no limit to how you can work and where you can work. Also, you can actually actively give back your knowledge and make money through that means. Like most of the places whereby you learn is as a result of people learning as much as they were able to, and thought that apart from them learning this, that they could teach this and they could actually give their money back. The likes of Udemy, the likes of Plural sites have those kind of models, and it's all built on people that have spent time to study and spent time to take the time to understand the workings of web development and the best practices for it, and have decided to use that knowledge and decided to give it back. One of the benefits is as well, and one of the most important benefits to me, is the fact that there is opportunity for continuous learning, in the sense that as long as there's going to be much more things that are going to be built with technology, there's also going to be a continuous need to automate more things that were previously automated. And technology has no limits, in the sense that there's always going to be more things that are going to be built, and as long as there's going to be more things that are going to be built, there's going to be newer technologies that is going to take over the previous ones. Or for example, most of the front-end frameworks, for example, let's say Vue.js, add the 2.0, even when some people are still trying to get a full grasp of Vue 2.0. Vue 3.0 came out some months ago, and that's a continuous lead, that's a new learning curve again. And as long as there's a new learning curve, I would utmostly prefer that to a course whereby there's always going to be a ceiling, as compared to the previous course I studied in school. No matter how much you learn, there's always a limit, and the only way you can even scale through that limit is through technology. But there was always a limit, there was always a stagnant limit, where unlike or compared to web development, as long as there's a need for new ways to automate tasks, newer technologies will come, and there will always be continuous learning. Even languages that you feel you still learn newer things about it along the job, and that to me is a very, very fulfilling reason to work as a web developer. And most importantly to me, anybody can learn it, in the sense that as long as you have a system, you have a working internet connection, and you are very willing to learn new things, and you are dogged about learning, there is no limit, there is no ceiling. And the thing is, you can't learn web development in 2 days. You can't learn it in 2 hours. You can't learn it in 2 days. The minimum I feel you can learn it is in 3 months. But in 3 months, the thing is, as long as you have that dogged mind to learn, you keep getting better day by day and day by day. And as long as you have that mindset, you can learn it. Like for example, I studied geology as a first degree, and also to a continuous extent as a second degree. And 2 years, 5 months ago, I decided to take that plunge and decided to be a software developer. And here I am. I won't say it has been the easiest of processes, but thankfully, my doggedness kept me through. And if I can, you can as well. Well, enough about why learn it. So we need to demystify some concepts. First of all, front end and back end. What about them? Front end is more or less the user interface, what you see as the user. Like for example, if you enter google.com, you see you see a search box, you see the Google icon, you see the images and other things. What you see, all those buttons, all those menus, all those pages, the links, the graphics, all those fancy stuff is more or less front end. Is more or less the front end. But no matter how beautiful a front end interface is, if you are not able to type something or write something, and when you search for it, it doesn't give you any data back. It's almost not functional. So more or less, a working internet website or a very optimal internet website is a combination of the front end and the back end interacting or talking to one another, with having more or less a website that has very good graphics, very good user interface and user experience, but at the same time there is a back end working for it, that if you want it to carry out a particular function, it's going to carry out that particular function. The combination of those two is what makes a very good working website. Let me take it up a notch and use my working example of you being a customer. You want to buy jollof rice, for example. The fact is, you go to a restaurant. This is when you go to a restaurant, is you like going to search for something, and you say you want rice. That's you going to the Google website and trying to search for something. Of course, the person will tell you that there is rice existent, but if the person does not bring something that has a semblance to jollof rice, it's almost like your request did not come true. So in honest sense, even if you see something that looks like jollof rice in that particular, you ask for jollof rice, but you don't see something that looks like jollof rice, it's almost as if you did not make that order. So really, the essence of a full website is the interaction between the front end and the back end technologies. The front end technologies are more or less the pages, the buttons, the links, the graphics, while the back end is more or less like the server that processes the information, the database that stores as much information that is returned back as your response, and the general application itself, authentication, middleware, every other thing. More or less, in this case, for the restaurant example, the front end is more or less that menu sheet that has all the menus that you want, but the back end is more or less like the restaurant that cooks the food and serves you the food. So I hope we all understand that. And without a good back end technology, front end, no matter how beautiful it is, it will not give you the best user experience. Well, for the best languages and technology for web development, I'll say from my good experience, I'll say basically anyone could, because it depends on what you want the language to do for you. Because you could build a very top-notch website with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which I'll just show us what it entails like in the next few slides. But the thing is, you might say that the website might not be scalable with just that, and you want to use like a back-end technology. Like for example, there was a site I built recently with HTML, CSS, and Python using Django, the Django framework. But I thought that if I wanted to build that same website with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I would have. But because of the particular need that I wanted it to do, because of what I needed, some of the functionalities I needed, that was why I selected the technology. But that does not mean that it's just one fixed technology. You could use just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, like I mentioned. You could add Python to the mix. You could add various. You could even say that you want to just go full client side and server side by saying that, okay, I want to use a front end framework like say React, Angular, Vue. Then you can combine it with a back-end framework like Django, Flask, Node.js, PHP, as the case may be. So you could say that you want to use the basic languages for the web, which could be HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. Or you would want to say that you want a back-end language first, then a front-end language, then they talk to one another using that client-server architecture that I mentioned. So over here is a graphic showing us what the interaction between front-end and back-end languages. Imagine this is the user, and this user is looking at this laptop, and most of all of these things, most of all of the things that make up what he sees is a combination of these front-end languages, which it could be HTML, which could be CSS, which could be JavaScript. You could also use libraries like jQuery. You could also use frameworks like AngularJS, React.js, Vue.js, as the case may be. And you could say you want to combine all of these libraries and frameworks with, for example, backend languages like PHP, Java, Python, Node.js, or you could also have a database as well, which is also related to the backend, which would be SQL or NoSQL. So now, in this case, what he sees is as a result of this, and what gives him back what he wants is a result of this. So that is how front end and back end work together. One without the other is almost ineffectual, because even if you write a good back end language, if the user does not have anything to see what the back end language does, it's almost useless. And even if you make the best of interfaces or the best user experience as possible, if it does not render you any data, or it doesn't act functionally, it's almost like your site is just for design or aesthetic purposes. So I said HTML, CSS, and JavaScript like 3 times, and this is like a graphic to show us what each of them entail. And how it works is, I would like to use the body of every human being as a very classic example of how these guys work, and how one is important to the other, and the combination of the 3 makes a very functional body. A very classic example is, for example, the HTML in a sense is like the skeletal framework of building any website, because without HTML there is no there will really be nothing to build upon, because it's more or less like the skeleton. And the truth is, with a skeleton and without skin, even if your skin gets burnt and it's just more or less skeleton, as long as you are present, you could still have that structural balance or stuff, but it would look rather hideous, as the person's body will look rather hideous without any form of skin or any form of flesh or anything. Then of course, if you then add flesh to this, is more or less what it means. If you have a very skeletal system without any skin, it's always going to be very hideous. But then you could also say that if you have your skeletal system, and you also have skin, but you can't function, or you can't, like if you are looking all fine and all, you can't talk, or you can't say you are saying stuff, or you can't use your hand to stretch out to pick stuff, or you can't kick stuff with your leg. It's almost like you are like a dummy. And that's where JavaScript comes in. JavaScript is the interaction, is what controls the interaction, in the sense that even if you have a skeletal framework and you have a perfect design, this JavaScript is what makes you interactive as a human being, and is what determines your functionality or your interactiveness. I'll use the same example of the jollof rice principle. The fact is, the HTML in this case is like the grain of rice. You could have a grain of rice, but without it going into fire or adding all the necessary ingredients to make it look like jollof rice, it's almost going to be scarcely believable to say that, okay, I cooked jollof rice. But even if you cook jollof rice and you add the ingredients without like the basic ingredients, without adding the seasoning and what makes it very, very sweet and all that and stuff, if all of those things are not present, no matter how convincing your jollof rice may look to the eye, if it doesn't taste well in the mouth, it's almost like the jollof rice didn't look, it was jollof rice you cooked. So a combination of the grain of rice, proper adding of the ingredients, and also the seasoning to make it taste like jollof rice is what makes the jollof rice. And jollof rice in this case is the website. A proper skeletal framework, the design of the skin, and also the interaction or the functionality is what makes it a basic website. And mobile CSS is more or less some CSS styles or some CSS design that you make, that makes whatever you wrote on a web app, when you check it out on your phone, it aligns or looks or creates almost the same experience as the normal website on a desktop browser. It's more or less the same look and feel. And there are libraries that do that, and you can also set up screen sizes and stuff to make that work. And in addition, there are useful links that I would suggest to every person that is willing to learn web development. You have www.w3schools.com. From experience, they work in modular format, whereby they drop useful links, useful useful documentation of stuff ranging from HTML to CSS to JavaScript, and it's a site that I would readily recommend for every up and coming dev. There are so many useful resources that you can actually look at there. Basic style stuff about HTML, basic CSS properties, what they do, and there are ways whereby you can test them. It's a wonderful site. Then developer.mozilla.org is also one very top website, in the sense that it takes most of the basic knowledge you get from W3 schools and expands on it further. It's a very, very wonderful resource. And with the first two, you can actually get a very good introductory knowledge on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for web development. But JavaScript on its own is a very, 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 very steep curve, and no matter how much you say you've gotten some information from these two, you still need more advanced knowledge on it to be able to manipulate it to fit your needs. It's a very steep curve, because even people that have learned JavaScript for 15 years, JavaScript still humbles them. So a very good place to improve on your knowledge is www.javascript.info, and with that you can build on your already budding JavaScript skills, and you can become a proper web developer that way. So right now, as a sample project, the idea is to use the basics of the previous languages that I itemized over here, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, to build this basic calculator. I would want to use this project to show how the interaction between these three can be used to build top-notch websites, but you can't start from building very top-notch websites without knowing how to build this use these technologies to build even the most basic of applications. So I would like to use these three technologies to build this calculator as is. And before I begin, I would want to show us a stepwise description of how we intend to build it. The first step is we need to understand that a calculator is made up of a table consisting of rows and columns. Mostly for the basic calculator is like a 4x4 table, in which you have 4 rows, 4 columns, and 4 rows, 2, 3, 4. But before that, it has a display whereby you can type in numbers, and it comes from the right to the left. Then you have specific keys whereby you type on 7. It's supposed to click on 7 on the display menu. You click on 8, it goes to 8 on the display menu. Click on 9, and so on and so forth. Then also you click on some specific operations, and you click on 7, say 7 plus 9, and it gives you 16 as a result. And if you click on this C button, it gives you 7 plus 9. Even if you write 7 plus 9, click on the C button, it cleans everything, and you'll have to type all over again. Alright, so the idea now is that there's a display input. Please note the word input. Then is also a row of keys, with each row also having some specific operators which are of a different color to the buttons that you click. And once you click them, it's supposed to create some logic that would give you an evaluated answer. So with that said, let's get coding. So the editor that I'll be using, the editor that I'll be using is VS Code. It's VS Code. Okay. So the code editor I'll be using is VS Code, and it's one of the most widely used code editors, and you can get it by checking through googling Visual Studio Code download. And once you click on it, So once you click on it, sorry for the initial internet connection issue. Once you click on it, it leads you to this site, whereby whereby you can select for which OS you are using, which could be either Windows, Linux, or Mac, depending also on the bit on your system, which could either be 64-bit or 32-bit. I've already installed it over here, so you could try that out from your own end. But before I begin, there are some important stuff I need to bring out. This is the file folders. You see it closes and opens up the folder structure. You could search for stuff here. You could do git using either source control, or you can do source control over here or on stuff. Then you can also run code. You could also use various extensions. It's more or less like the Google Play application, that you would go to the Google Play Store and you can search for a particular application and then click on it to install and to download, and it's almost the same thing. For this exercise that we are going to do, there are two important extensions that I want us to download, which is, I have a lot of extensions already, but the first one I want us to install or download is Live Server. Okay, all right, so this is already installed for me, but this is more or less going to create like a local development server, whereby it has all you need to install and all you need to use to build what you want to build. And also you have Prettier. Prettier is more or less like saying that I have code that is not necessarily neat, or is not necessarily aligned, and it's very hard to read. Once you select the particular set of code, you can click on it and then you can format it as the need be. All right, so with this guys installed, I would like to talk about a very important concept which I'm going to use to build this app. I call it the separation of concerns principle. The separation of concerns principle is more or less giving what you need to do to give to one particular guy to that particular guy, and when you give each of them their particular specific purposes, you can then link each of them one to the other together. So normally I could naturally write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into one file, but apart from the fact that it's clunky, there's also what we call do not repeat yourself. That's DRY principle, whereby you're putting in too much code into one particular part of your editor, and it's not best practice. So apart from writing code, I would also want to introduce us to the first line of best practice, which is separate concerns, and then if you need them to talk to one another, you interact with each of them together. It's what we call a modularity, more or less. So there are practically of a file and two folders I'll be needing for this project. So I'll create the first one, which is more or less I need to add a folder, but before I need to add a folder, I need to create one. So let me create one. The first thing I do now is I create a new folder. I call it calculator, and it's on my desktop. So if I click on add folder now, I'm looking for a folder in my desktop panel, and the name of the desktop is calculator, and I add it. All right, so with that said, I have a calculator folder, and it's on this folder that I will build up on my application on. And inside this calculator folder, the first file okay, over here now there is what we call a folder panel now. So even if I want to create a new file, there's an option, there's an icon to create a new file, there's an icon to create a new folder, there's an icon to refresh the Explorer, and there's an icon to also collapse all the folders in the Explorer. But what we want to do first is to create a new file inside the calculator folder, and this is index.html. I could even call it calculator.html actually, and all I just need to do is do calculator.html. All right, and We should also take note of the extension name .html. .html indicates to our system that we are dealing with, or our editor, that we are dealing with HTML files. And since I'm using HTML, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we need to use corresponding extensions. So, like we say, for Microsoft Word, we use or we use a PDF. We say daily.pdf or femi.pdf. We also need an index.html file, so a calculator.html file. Whatever name you put in front of the .html is not important. The .html is very important because it is an identifier for making this editor know that we are dealing with HTML files. Same thing as CSS, same thing as JavaScript. Normally, the normal idea is I've typed the doc type and some other things, but for us to save time, there's a very important plugin that comes pre-installed with VS Code, and it's named Emmet. Emmet is a plugin whereby it auto-completes and it makes our coding flow very easy. So for us to use that, we need to just, for us to create a basic HTML boilerplate, which is the first thing we need to do, you could just click on the exclamation sign and press tab. On clicking on tab, it gives us the doc type, it gives us the HTML tag, which is having a language of English. It has the head tag, which has the metadata, which could be the encoding stuff, which is really not that important. It's like metadata that we just need to, we feel that HTML needs to have. We also need to set as well the scale, so that it will take whatever we are writing will take up the entire size of our screen. Then the title is normally a default set to document, but since we are building a calculator, we could just call it calculator. It will then make our browser understand that the name or the title on the browser tab is more or less calculator. And the syntax of this is what we call HTML syntax, and the basic part of HTML syntax is it has a less than sign. Whatever we want to use, let me say for example my name is Daily now, and you have a greater than sign, but Emmet has made it so possible that once it sees the opening sign, it closes it, more or less. So within this, I could do whatever I want to do, but let's show us how HTML works. So what I want to do now is that this is called an H1. This makes it causes like a increased bolding kind of display effect, and it ranges from H1 to H6. That's HTML really, and we can only learn more through research and maybe further down the line. If you click on the H1 tag and click on tab, it closes it, and then I can say hello world, which is the basic syntax to open, really show us what we are all dealing with. So you click on this, and sorry, my bad. You then this is the basic part of live server. So you right click, and when you right click, there's an option to open with live server, and when you do that, it shows that there's a port, and oh shit, it shows there's a port, and voila, we have the hello world in a black H1 kind of format. And there are so many other things we could do with it, but for what we want to do, so I won't take time, one thing about Emmet is the default, if you click on the dots, the default there's what we call divisions, because I mentioned that we have various divisions whereby we can place elements one above the other, and one of the major elements whereby we can do spacing for HTML elements is what we call the div. So this is what I mean by the div. So if I do div and I say hello, and I do another div and I say world, and I save, is more or less going to sorry. Yes, one thing about live server which I forgot is that it has the option to auto reload. So if I click on this and I save this, it's going to auto reload and change, because initially it was an hello world, but now that we've done the div, it's properly spaced. So one thing about the div is that it spaces your element from here to here. from here to here and from here to here. Is left for us to change the width as we see fit, and that's what CSS does. But what we are now trying to do now, since it's a div, one thing about Emmet that makes it so beautiful is that if I click on a dot and I do this, if I do, like, I want to create a class, and the class is what we call a selector. A selector is like we select something and we try to style it based on that. So let me use an example with what we want to do, because I remember we said the first thing that we needed to do is to create like a calculator div. Like, for example, in our project here, in our project here, this is an entire calculator, so we want to set a calculator class, but you set it as a div here now. So what we need to do is we need to set a calculator class. Then inside this calculator class there is a display input. Then we also have a keys class, a class or a keys division. So what we want to do now is, the first thing we do is create a calculator division, or a calculator division. But this class of calculator, we can select it and then stick to manipulate things on it. So this is where I introduce us to the basics of CSS. So we could have a style, and we could say this calculator class that we could select it, and the way to select a class is we put a dot in front and then you do calculator. Then when you do that, you have an open curly brace and a closing curly brace. Then you say and what about CSS is that it has various properties, and one of the properties that can be used for testing most times is background color, and we could set the background color to red. So when you click on that and you let's say for example do hello world again, or we put that in a paragraph. This P is a paragraph tag, and we put hello world, and as long as it's inside this, it's supposed to make everything within that hello world have a red background. So let's check and see. And here we go. This is the hello world that we created, but has a reddish background to it. Well, we move on, but that's not really what we want. But this is just to show how CSS and HTML interact with one another. But we are still going to separate all of this using our separation of concerns principle. But this is just to introduce us to it. And like I said, inside this calculator class, we have an input. And an input is more or less like a text field, whereby is in like a border that has a border that you select. So I'll show us what I mean. All right. So this is the most basic form of input, which is type of text. And inside here, because of what I've done, oh sorry, I need to remove this as well, because we are not using that right now. So inside here, I save that. Inside here, I could just type hello world. This is an input field. I can input anything. That's why I call it an input field. But the thing is, for our calculator, by first instance, we don't want anything to be written in it unless we specify that something has to be written in it. So there's, in every HTML element, an HTML element has what we call an attribute, and an attribute is what we could use to give extra characteristics to an HTML element. So we could set it to disabled, so that when it's first triggered, it doesn't do anything. So if we save this, the initial element that we could add, I can't type anything on it anymore. It's disabled until something gets clicked on it. So with that said, we've settled the first part, but we are still going to make styles so that it will look exactly like this. But the display part is just about sorted. But one more thing is that for us to style this display, we need to add this. And when this is added, we've done the display part. So next thing is we need to create 4 rows of buttons. 4 rows of buttons. That's 4 rows and 4 rows and 4 columns. So for us to do a 4x4, we need to create 4 rows. And one thing about Emmet as well is that I'm creating a class of row, and I can say that I want 4 because I want 4 rows. I can multiply by 4. Once I click on this, it gives me 4 rows. And once there are 4 rows, I can then say I want 4 buttons. I want 4 buttons, and I can also multiply that by 4. And once I click on that, it gives me 4 buttons. So I could then say, for example, looking at this folder, I could say that there is a 7, there's an 8, there's a 9, there's a plus. Then for me to create that, I need to go back to my editor and say, for example, I say I want 7, I want 8, I want 9, and I want a plus sign. But that's not enough. For me to be able to use JavaScript, I need to add what we call a value property, which I will explain when I talk about the JavaScript part. Then I create another value property. I give it 8. Another value property, I give it 9. Another value property, I give a plus. So this is what we would do. So one thing I intend to do is I'll save this and I'll show us what we have been able to create. And this is what we've been able to create. Not fanciful thus far, but once CSS comes in, it will look more beautiful. Alright, so the next step is I want to replicate what I've done, but also because if you notice, the color of the operator buttons, which is the plus, minus, times, and equal, is not the same thing as the normal buttons. I need to create a particular class for it as well, because classes is what we can use to separate stuff. So create an operator class, then we could then replicate it because it's almost the same thing. We could then add it over here, and we could add it as well, and we could add it as well. But now it's time to edit it. To edit this, since the next set of buttons is 4, 5, and 6, I need to give it new values of 4, 5, and 6, and I'll explain it once again what it's supposed to do when I get to the JavaScript extent. So this is minus, if I'm not mistaken, just to check. Okay. Then this is 4. Oh, sorry, mistake. That's one of my plugins misbehaving. And 6 and minus. Meanwhile, I said I was going to wrap it in a keys class, so let me do it that way. Let me move all of this, guys. Alright, I'm going to take all of them and I'm going to move them inside here so that it will have a key. There will be a keys class, but inside that keys class we have all these 4 rows. It really doesn't make much of a difference, but I feel it's much more, it has much better semantics, so if in case you want to understand what is going on. So here we have 1, we have 2, oh shit, we have we have 2, there's a typo here, so we have 3 as well. So we have 1, we have 2, and we have 3, and over here we have a multiplication sign, and we have a multiplication sign. So as well, apart from that, the last set of rows we've done handled for this, we've handled for this, we've handled for this, so this is the last one. Since this is going to be an operator, we give it a class of operator as well, and we call it C. We also have a value of what is it 0, and we give it 0, but since it's not an operator, we could just give it our normal button class, button stuff. Then we have a divided sign, then under this we just give it the divided sign. We also need to give it a class of operator because it's also an operator. Alright, so finally we have the equals to sign, and since it's also an operator, we leave it as it is and we give it an equal to sign. With that saved, this is what we have as our final result. We have the basic structure. This is the HTML side, not fanciful you might say, but we have a bare bone structure whereby we can build on with. Then with that said, this is where CSS comes in, but this is the part I need to cheat on because of time. I need to import in some styles, and when I import in some styles, I can assure you it will look very similar to this, and I'll just do my best within a few minutes to explain what each of those styles do as regards what we are building. Alright, so without further ado, I have already prepared these styles. in inside CSS styles. Good. Then all I just need to do is just take all of this, take it out. And then one thing I need to do as well now, this is where separation of concerns is. I could just do everything inside the styles tag, and hope this works. Yeah, it will work. And if I save this and I open up, this is what I'm going to do. You can see, voila, it's almost the same thing as this guy, even much more beautiful. So this is what a few styles here and there can do, but this betrays my separation of concerns principle, in the sense that I'm putting up too many lines of code inside one particular file. Though some people might think that that is not serious, it's going to be very hard for readability issues for anybody that wants to look at it, and it could be very intimidating. So instead of that, what I'm going to do this time is, inside the calculator folder that I created, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it CSS, and this is going to house all my CSS files. And within the CSS folder, sorry, I'm going to create a styles.css styles.css file. So the way it works is, the calculator folder has an index.html file, then a CSS folder having a styles.css file. So I'm going to paste all this, although it's still much code, but it's not going to take itself up inside one particular file. But with that said, I'm going to remove this style tag, and I'm going to save both files. But spoiler alert, it's going to still give you the same rubbish, what I say, very unattractive HTML style. So this leaves us with an issue. So the question now is, how do we import or introduce the CSS styles that I just created without putting them inside one file? Simple. Inside your HTML, there's what we call there's a way we can do it, called via what we call a link. So there's a link HTML tag. So once you click on it with your HTML, with your element abbreviation showing you what to do, it has various ways whereby you can import CSS files. You can import favicons, that's icons on your tab, or on various other things. But what we are looking for is just a style sheet tag. So since one thing about CSS is cascading style sheets. So since it's a style sheet, this link tag already recognizes as the style sheet that is going to enter. And what we then do to introduce it is that we could just do the backslash. Once we do the backslash, we go to CSS. Dot slash is that we are going up a folder. We go to CSS. Then inside CSS, we introduce styles.css. And with one line, I'll be pleased to inform you that we are back to how it is. So this is what I call separation of concerns. Having a separate file doing a separate function, and you can then introduce that into your main entry point, which is the calculator.html file. CSS is just to add more styles to the HTML. So you can just create our styles in one separate place and then introduce that into our HTML. So the CSS that I wrote here, number one is just to create like what we call resetter styles, because for let me use this example here. There's always a margin between, like, from this calculator to this edge. There's what we call a margin to the left, there's a margin to the top, and there's a margin to the bottom between this calculator and relatively around to places around it. But within this calculator, for example, there are buttons around it, and between the 7 here and the top, and the 7 here and the bottom, there's what we call spaces as well, and this is what we call padding. You could check them out on Mozilla or W3 schools. This is the fundamental processes or the fundamental concepts of spacing, and it's rather important you understand them. Then you set initial padding of this to 0, and padding to 0 and the margin to 0 on this star is for everything, every element. It dedicates every element on the page, the body, everything, so that there won't be some spaces. There won't be spaces on any side of the sheet of the document. The document is more or less everything here is more or less a document. A website is more or less a document. So everything in documents, they set the padding and the margin to 0, so that there won't be any space overflowing across it. Also, we set the body to have a width and a height of 100 view width. VW is view width, VH is view height. This is done so that it takes up the entire size of the screen, and it takes the entire width of the screen as well. Also, we set the overflow set to hidden. Setting it to visible, you can see it has an MDN reference. If I click on it, it will take us to what it does. Hidden is to remove that initial X and that scrolling effect, and it will make us have a better layout view. Then also we set, normally the normal default for a display is block, I think, yeah, block. But also we could set a variety of things from block to inline block to flex and other things. But flex is what I selected because it's a trick whereby I can centralize the entire calculator. Because if you notice, the calculator is central to across the document, and the quickest way is that I initially set the calculator so that it would expand from one end of the page to the other by setting the display to flex, and that's why I set it to flex. Oh, sorry. Yeah. But also, display set to flex, you can adjust many other things in the sense that you can justify your content. When I mean justify content, I'm justifying the content from left to right and align the items from top to bottom. If I justify content from right to left to the center, it stays centrally along the vertical lines. But if I adjust the content from the top to the bottom centrally as well, it stays centrally. So that's why it's central here. Then the background color of the body itself, if you notice, is this blackish shade. If you notice, this is the body. So the entire body is what I set over here. The body of the HTML element is what I selected, and that's what I did. So I set the initial font family to sans serif. You can also adjust the font family with CSS as well. Then the calculator body that I did, which was from here, was everything, including everything that was inside here. I also selected it, and I set some styles to it. Oh, sorry, my bad. This entire calculator object, I set some styles to it. So first thing I did on the CSS files was to set the width 300 pixels. So on this central element, the width from here to here, is 300 pixels, and the height, did I set the height as well? Sorry, the padding to the bottom is 15 pixels. Okay, the padding to the bottom is 15 pixels. So let's say from this calculator element down to the bottom is 15 pixels. It's 15 pixels. Also, I set the border radius. That's, of course, the calculator had. I set this radius across it from the top to the bottom. You could see that there are some curved edges, unlike the normal square-like shape I expected it to take. I gave it like that radius across it to 7 pixels and other things. The box shadow, the background color is black. If I can explain this, the back is black. If you notice, it's black. This is a display. This is just the display, so this doesn't count. What else? The box shadow is more or less there's like a shadow-like effect at the bottom. The shadow-like effect at the bottom is a result of box radius, which has an X and Y offset, a blur radius, and a shadow radius as well. The display, which I mentioned, is over here. So I set the display, the width to be 100% of 300 pixels. So if this is 300 pixels, the display normally that could have been a bit smaller will take up 100%. Also, I set the height of the display to 80 pixels. So the height from here to here is 80 pixels. Also, the box sizing, I set it to border box to set it to a proper, set the width and height properties of the calculator to the proper size. Then the padding between all sides of the display is the padding between all sides of the display is 10 pixels from the top to bottom, from right to left, and from all sides as well. Then the background color or the font size of whatever goes into the calculator itself is of the display of the calculator will be of 2 rems. That's like sizing, and you learn more as time goes on. Then the background color of this display is light green, this light green color. All right. The color of the text that comes in will be black, and that will only be seen when I type something. And to align the text, I set it to right, so that whenever I type anything, it comes from the right to the left, not from the left to the right, or not centrally. It was intentional. Border left and border right is not really important. Then the row, I set it to flex and justify space between. When I set it to flex, it takes up the entire width of this, but space between is that there's space between here and here, here and here, here and here, and here and here, up to the first part of the width to the last part of the width, but there's just space in between them, so that all these buttons will have proper space to rest. All right, so for each button, I set a width and height for 50-50 pixels, width and height, length and breadth. The border radius is what makes it have a circular shape across board. The outline, that's the outline of the border. I remove the border and any outline that comes from it to be known. I set the font size, the size of the buttons, to 1.5 rem. Sorry. Then I set the margin between each button to 10 pixels. So the margin from here to here, not the margin from the letters to this, that's the padding, but from here to here I set it to like 10 pixels, so that there will be proper space between each of them, so that they will rest properly. On hovering on the button, among the last things is, if I were on the button, the default cursor shows, but when I click on it, it shows like a hand, that's like a pointer. All right, so for each operator, the background color is the same color as the display, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, as the display, and the background color is this. So over here, this is what I mean by the background color, but inside there's a default color which is black. All right, so that's the CSS aspect of it. So we then move to the JavaScript aspect, and that's where so normally the idea is, the next step is to introduce JavaScript in, and normally I will have said, let me write the script, create a script tag, because that's what makes the editor know that you're writing JavaScript code inside HTML, and I could close that, and then I could start typing whatever I need to type. But I'm going to use the same separation of concerns principle, and then work on the JavaScript part. And the only way I can do that is I create another folder inside this calculator, and I call that JS. JS is short for JavaScript, and then I click on that, and inside that I can then create a new file and call it calculator.js. all right. So with that said, I could then, instead of writing all of my JavaScript code, I could just do script, and I set it the source. This is why I select, then I click on tab, it opens up, then I could just do /. I go to JavaScript. Editor is that intelligent, it shows me my file structure because I've gone a step up. Then I then do calculator.js. And that's it, I can save, and whatever JavaScript that I write is going to show. So JavaScript is more or less the interactivity part. You'd indulge me. This could be a bit confusing at first, but I'll do my best to make it easy. So one thing about JavaScript is a very flexible language, a very intelligent language, a very good language. But you need to understand that it has a variety of data types, which could run from strings, and a string could be anything. Like, let's say, for example, one of the things about JavaScript is there are ways whereby you need to store values. For example, if you have your name as delay, you could say that they want to call you, and you know your name is delay. If you call you, that's only when you recognize it. So there has to be a place whereby you can store your name, or whereby you keep your name, whereby they call you and you can then be used. For example, you have a silo or a store whereby you can keep food, and whenever you need the food you can then use it. And the only way you can store stuff is if you use a variable. Or a variable is old syntax, but better syntax is instead of using variables you can use let or const. But it's most times if you want, let is when you want to change the variable's name, but const is when you want it to stay as it is. So I could say the string could be const. And one thing about strings is it has a system whereby it's used. You could say const name is equals to daily, and this is a string because it has quotation marks at the front and at the back, and you can then put whatever you want to put. Strings have methods attached to them, but this is a string. You could also have a number, cost number, and the number could either be 7 or it could be 7.5. 7 is an integer while 7.5 is a float. A boolean, you could say a boolean is could either be true or false, could be variety of things, but these are just some of the basic steps. I would have loved to dive deep, but there is limited time, so I have to go as far as I could. So the first thing I need us to understand is I want to pick out from this calculator. I remember I told us about values, and I told us about this. The value is what we are going to use to select and pick out stuff that I want to manipulate. So I'm going to use a JavaScript concept called documents manipulation, whereby you first select and then modify using some JavaScript review. Alright, so the first step is select. So first of all I'm going to select all the buttons, because for me to actually work with this calculator I need to click all these buttons. I need to click this button, this button, this button. So I need to select all buttons and then work with them. And one thing about like I said, this entire screen is what we call a document, and a document you can select node lists on a document. So you could say document, which is the global variable on your website, and you can then say you want to query select. You either have your query selector to pick a particular element, or you pick all elements on a node list. So I could say query selector all. That means I'm selecting all the buttons available, and then it gives me what I want to pick out. So it has various HTML elements here, but I'm selecting the button, so I'm saying selecting all buttons. So the idea behind this is when I want to manipulate anything, I have the ability to select all buttons, and I can be able to click any button because I've selected this. Then I'm also going to it is not enough to click on a button. I also need to know what I'm displaying on. So, and this is the beauty of why I created a class for it. So I'll say document.query selector, because I'm only selecting one particular class, and this particular class is this display class over here. I'm selecting this display class, and I want to select it, and I want to manipulate it to what I want it to do. But first of all, I need to select it. So I need to just do query selector. And one thing about query selector is I could say I'll have to do dot display. So it's showing that okay, anything with dot display, I want to select it. Another alternative is I could say const display 2 is equals to document dot get element by class name. So let me get element by class name. It could even be easier for us. So instead, if you notice, I used the dot here because the query selector does not know whether it's a class or an ID. It could select anything by an ID, and meanwhile an ID is anything that starts with this, but it's dot, so it's a class. But here now I'm selecting every element by class name, and I don't need a dot because it's a class name. I could also do document const display 3 equals to documents dot get element by element by, okay, sorry, I saw that here, element by ID, yeah, game by ID, and I could then select what I want to select. But since I could say query selector, I'm going to use that. Alright, so one thing that also, there's what we call looping through, looping through. So I want to loop through all buttons. So I've selected all buttons, but it's not all buttons that I'm going to press all at once. I need to be in a position whereby once I'm looking through all the buttons, there has to be a particular button I'm selecting, and once I click on that button, it's supposed to carry out a particular action for me. So in JavaScript, we have what we call looping to pick out one particular part of a long list, because this most times brings what we call an array, and an array is like an index list of lots of objects. And one thing about it is you can select each part of an array in a process what we call looping, and we could either loop using the normal for loop or a for each loop. So I hope I'll be able to break this down properly, and I could just say buttons dot for each. Now I'll write the method out, then I'll explain. Alright, so when I do button dot, okay, add event list now, and I click, when I click, I calculate. Alright, so the idea behind this is, for each of all these buttons that I've selected, for all of these buttons, for each of these buttons, I'm going to call a function. A function for it is what is something that does a particular job. Like a function, the function of a car is to drive. So once I enter a car, I expect it to drive. But one thing about a function is that you first declare it, then you call it, and it's only when you call it that's when it fires. So the one thing about a function, for you to write a function in JavaScript, you write, say, the function, let's say, and calculate A and B, and this A and B are what we call this is the function keyword. The function keyword, then the name of the function, then you have sets of parameters which could be A and B, initial parameters, but you can then add that. So you can then add the genuine values later on. Then I could then say console. Okay, then one of the ways you can output values or you can test for values is what we call console.log. Console.log runs things on our console. So now, okay, let me say console.log a plus b, right? So I could then, after I've declared this function, I could just say okay, I could then say calculate 2 and 3. This is me. Now one thing about functions is once you declare the function, this is a function declaration. Once you declare it, you can then call it. Once you are able to call it, it will give you the value on your console. And one thing about the browser is so beautiful that we have what we call a developer console. So when I click on Ctrl+Shift+J, it opens up the console over here. Or I could close that and I could just do inspect, and when I inspect, it opens it up again, and I go to console because I want something on the console. So once I save this, now the idea is when I say for each button, once I go to this particular button, we have what we call an add event listener. That is going to listen for a particular event, and when that event is fired, in this case, if I click on particular button, is going to carry out this function and take in these two parameters and add them together. So I expect 2 plus 3 is equals to 5. So an example is if I click on 5, oh, it's not working. Just a moment, please. I'll be able to get it now. So it so happens that it was a lag, but once I click on 5, it works. You can see that it works over here, so that's not an issue. So most of the time it's just for the console to respond most times. So if I click on the button, it's supposed to give me the number 5. Alright, so but that's not what we want to do. So the idea is just to introduce us to what functions do. So the function is that once I add on this, once I click on each button, it's just going to calculate it. There'll be, you can check MDN for more views, but instead of taking in A and B, for example, I'm going to take in what we call an event, because an event comes in custom with every function. So if you create any function, or you say function a day, you say for example function a day, it has the event as the first as the first parameter. You can add any other parameter, but there's always an event fired. So I want to store the event into a value, and this is the beautiful part of what we call a variable. All of this is a variable, because you can change, you can set it to something and you can then use it later. But this constant is in the sense that once you set it, you can't change it, but you can instead use var or let to change later on. But we are using const this way because we don't intend to change it. Alright, so I want to say clicked button value is equal to events. Alright, so saving this, once I click on this button, I want to console.log. I want to log onto my console. I want to output onto my console this clicked button value that I created, and I save it. And also I save this and I click on this, it gives me what we call an event, and this is an event because I used a mouse on this button and I clicked on it and I created a new event. And on this new event, there are a variety of things whereby you can see that, okay, this is where it moved on your y-axis, this is where it moved on your x-axis, as the case may be. But what I want us to see is what we call the target. The target is what we call a button. So if I say I want to call it, instead of it to be the event, I'm calling it the event.target, and I save it, and I click on this guy again. It's going to show me a button, but notice this is the value. This was what I wanted to say. So this idea now that I want to do is, I want to, when I click on this, it's just going to output the value, and that is the beauty of it. But if I only use the event, it will just stop at that target part. Alright, so I click on it again, and I go to the button. If you notice, it has no targets. It has no targets. It actually doesn't have a target. Okay, but it also has a value. But if I remove the value will not have been present. But this is the only way whereby I'll be able to pick out all of those elements and then be able to output them. So all I just need to do is I just do event, and I do the target, and I do the value. Sorry. Alright, so if I click on this again, I click on 3, it should give me 3. If I click on 2, it gives me 2. If I click on 1, it gives me 1. If I click on C, it gives me C. Alright, so that said, we've been able to establish the first part, which is to get the display value working. Now once we click it, it's going to produce back the display. So the next step I'm going to do now is that we have what we call conditional checks, and we are just going to check that if something is something, do something. If something is not something, do something. And we have what we call comparison operators. We have what we are going to use is the triple equals operator, which is to check if is that exact thing, if it's the same thing in value and in type. If it's the same thing, it is true, and not is true, it goes. But if it's false, it will not go. So that's what we are trying to do. So if what I'm not going to do is I'm going to make a check. So you have if the if keyword, which is to check for a condition, then the value of the condition, and when you have the value of the condition, this is what the logic we want it to do. So if I say that the click button value, which we created here, is triple equals to now is equals to this. So that means if I'm clicking on something that has the value of this equal to sign,
it should do something. And what I want it to do is also, I'm also going to now check as well, because you could also click on equal to sign without having anything typed. So I also need to also check if the display, this is the display class, the display that I selected, and this display guy, if I do the display dot value is not equal to an empty string. An empty string is something that doesn't have any value. If I type 9, this is not an empty string, but because there's nothing in between, it's an empty string. So if I do that, if it's not equal to an empty string, then that means display dot value, and that's whatever comes up on this display will be equal to me evaluating what the display dot value is, and that's it right there. Then else if I'm also going to check if the display the calculate button value is equal to C, because I also need to know that, okay, if this is clicked on, everything will go back to will be cleared off. So for me to clear it off, of course, like I mentioned, because if it's empty, if there's nothing, it's going to be an empty string, which is this. I'm now going to say that the display value, that's the display dot value, is equal to an empty string. The display dot value right here, please let's note, is the value of whatever is put up on this display class, display value, whatever the case may be. Alright, so with that said, it's going to be an empty string. Else, I'm also, if that's not the case, I'm going to say that the clicked button value, I'm going to attach the click button value with the display dot value. So that means we have three cases here, which is if it is 5 plus 6. If it's 5 plus 6 and I've not added the equal to sign, without the equal to sign, this would run. Else, if I had the equal to sign and there's something here, it's going to evaluate to 11. Otherwise, if it's 5 plus 6 and I had 5 plus 6, okay, sorry, 5 plus 6, okay, 5 plus 6, and I press on the C key, it's going to clean everything. So with that said, we're going to try it out, and if there are any errors, we debug. Alright, so if I do 7, okay, assignment to a constant variable. Oh, fantastic. That means what happened here is it already knows that this is a constant already, but the mistake I am making now is I'm calling it almost immediately after this, and once it is saying that it doesn't know which one is which. So the best thing I can do is, since the display dot value is a variable, what it's telling me I should do is I need to just change this to display dot value, and I had this to the clicked button value, and that should solve the issue. So with that said, I think this should work. So this is 7. You can see that it's already displaying, because the display dot value understands that there is a value of 7 I'm clicking, and I say plus 9. Now the stuff is showing now that I'm adding, but it doesn't what is to call it, it doesn't the equal sign is not 1, so it can't evaluate anything. But if I click on the C button, everything goes away. But if I do 7 plus 9 again and I click on equal to sign, evaluates to 16. If I multiply it by 3, it should give me 48. If I subtract it by 6, it should give me 42. And if I add by 9, it should give me 51. And if I clean again, it goes. But if I do 7 plus 9 plus 8, plus 5 plus 4 plus 6, it gives me the right evaluated value, and I clean it. And that's all. That's just the interaction between HTML to build the basic framework I designed it with CSS, and then there's a JavaScript option. I know that this is a bit of a complex bit, but to the best of my knowledge, I've been able to explain this, and I hope we've learned a bit. The idea is just to select each button, and also to select whatever comes into the display, store it as a value. Then we look through each of these buttons that we selected, and for each of these buttons, when we click on it, we run this calculate function. And this calculate function, we first store the click button value and store it in an event, in the event parameter, the target of that event, and also the value, due to the fact that we have a value already set up for each button. And then when we do that, we check that if the click button value is the equal to sign, we also check that if there must be something that has already been attached. If something has been attached, we then add or subtract or multiply, as the case may be. Else, if the click button is C, it cleans off everything and returns an empty string. Otherwise, if there is no equal to sign and the C button is not clicked, we append or concatenate or add an extra value to it. And when we do that we develop to this. So we have a full working calculator. Oh, sorry, I don't think I've done options for the negative sign, so that's more or less how it works. Or let's even check. 4 minus 5 should give you -1 exactly. So that's the calculator right here. So to round off, all right, I've been able to show you how it is via the coding exercise. And what next? We have a 5 weeks web app development and bootcamp class, which we want to teach the fundamentals of web design. We want to build up on what we've learned here using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build top-notch responsive websites which are modern in nature. And we also want to introduce you to web applications and also serve as an icebreaker to build more modern mobile apps. I would like you to also know that it's also 100% virtual and instructor-led, and if you want to know more, you want to learn more, you can access the handles at the bottom below, and somebody will be happy enough to reach out to you. I hope in this period, or this hours of long, or 1 or 2 hours or 3 hours, as case may be, part of the lectures, that I passed enough information and I've stirred your interest in web development. And with that said, I really want to thank you for your time, and hopefully I see you guys on the 16th of January when we start the accelerator class.